Two of the most important elements in photography are light and color. Now, if you don't have light, then you don't have a photograph in the first place, because that's what your camera records. And no matter how beautiful your landscape is, you need good light in order to capture a beautiful photo. Also crucial to photography is color, one of the properties of light. Now, color is how we see the world, and it conveys a lot of emotions in your photograph. So in this chapter, I'll discuss the importance of light and color, and how you can use them to your advantage in photography. To start, light is important to photography because it carries such strong emotions. This is why a lot of photographers pay close attention to the brightness of their images. It has a significant impact on the look and feel of their photographs. For example, if you're out photographing a storm and you want to show how intense and powerful it is, you wouldn't want to take a bright, optimistic photo. And for the same reason, you wouldn't want a dark photo of certain subjects because it might conceal details from a viewer and impart a mood that you're not trying to show. So how do you take a photo that's brighter or darker? Well, there are two main ways. First, in the field, you can simply adjust your exposure settings to capture a brighter or darker image. And after you've already captured the photo, you can lighten or darken it in post-production. The important thing is that you do all of this intentionally, because bright light and dark light convey very different moods to your photograph. And you can also take a bright or dark photo at any time of day, so this is something that applies to every photo that you take. You'll notice that many landscapes have some bright portions and some dark portions. Now, if you have two elements in the same photo that are vastly different in brightness, but they're right next to each other, that creates something that's known as contrast. And contrast is everywhere in landscape photography. If you're photographing a bright pond that has a dark shoreline, that's contrast. If you're photographing the silhouette of a mountain against the sky, that's contrast. So clearly you'll come across contrast very frequently, which makes it a crucial element of landscape photography. Just like how brightness and darkness convey emotions in a photo, contrast does the exact same thing. For example, a high contrast photo tends to pop out, attracting attention, while a low contrast photo can be the exact opposite. It's a little bit more subdued. However, neither one is better or worse for landscape photography, and both can be very powerful depending upon your scene. For example, if you want a photograph that's a little bit more gentle and subtle, a low contrast image might be the way to go. Or if you want your photograph to pop out and attract more attention, you might search for something that's a little bit higher in contrast. Either way, do so intentionally. Ideally, no part of your photograph should happen by accident. A common misconception is that contrast is the difference between the brightest and the darkest portions of an image, but that's not completely true. Take a look at this gradient, for example. As you can see, this gradient has an area that's completely white and an area that's completely black, but they're separated by such a soft gradation that it has very little contrast. On the other hand, take a look at this image. Even though it has the exact same range of tones, the white and black portions of the image are right next to each other, and that creates an extremely high amount of contrast. So how do you capture the contrast that you want in a scene? Well, a lot of it comes down to the specific landscape that you're photographing, and especially the light. If you're taking pictures on a cloudy, overcast day with a subject that doesn't have much variation, you'll end up with a low contrast image. Or if you're taking pictures where the sun is shining directly onto your subject with dark shadows, then you'll end up with a high contrast photograph. However, you can also adjust this to a degree in post-production, so you do have some flexibility. Another property of light is whether it's considered hard or soft, and this has to do with the transition between light and shadow. For example, if you're taking pictures at a scene where the sun is behind a cloud, then you'll end up with very soft light, where there isn't much difference between the lit side of your subject and the darker side. However, if you're photographing a scene where the sun is bright and there are no clouds in the sky, then you'll end up with very harsh shadows that have a lot of contrast. In landscape photography, you'll find yourself taking pictures with hard or soft light all the time, and one is not necessarily better than the other. For example, at sunrise or sunset, the sun typically has to filter through a lot of the atmosphere, and you'll end up with relatively soft light and gentle shadows on your subject. And that can be appealing for certain images where you want a calmer, softer look. However, in other photographs, like this one for example, harsh light is not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, I wanted to demonstrate the intensity of the landscape, and hard light does exactly that. So at the end of the day, both types of light are important tools to have at your disposal. The angle of your light source is also very important in landscape photography. For example, you might have overhead lighting where the sun is directly above your subject and casting shadows that run straight down it. And this typically isn't a very flattering look, just like it isn't usually a very flattering look in portrait photography. It's not like it never works, but it isn't something that you'll typically look for. However, there are certain types of light that work very well for landscape photography, such as side lighting. When the sun is low in the horizon and it casts beautiful light on the side of your subjects, it can illuminate either the left or right-hand side and throw the other a little bit more into shadow. In addition, because of the long shadows that this type of lighting can cast, a lot of landscape photographers specifically seek it out. You also have front lighting, where the sun is essentially behind you as you're taking pictures, filling in most of the shadows in your scene, and this can result in relatively even lighting. On top of that, the exact opposite is backlighting, where the sun is behind your subjects, casting the shadows in your direction. And this can work very well in landscape photography because it simplifies the scene. Personally, if I'm out and it's mid-afternoon and the light isn't that good, I'll often try to find subjects that are backlit so that I can reduce the chaos of an image. Keep in mind that you're not necessarily restricted to the angle of light that you see when you first look at a scene. Specifically, if the sun is low on the horizon, you have a lot of flexibility. For example, if you're photographing a silhouetted tree that's backlit, you might want to change around the lighting. And all that you need to do is walk around the tree to alter how the photo looks somewhat significantly. Now, the specific type of lighting that works the best will change depending upon the scene in front of you and your specific goal for an image. But you have options, and that's the important thing. So far, I've only briefly talked about the importance of color in landscape photography, but it can be almost as crucial as the light itself. Specifically, good color can take a photo from being mediocre to being spectacular, which is yet another reason why a lot of landscape photographers prefer to take pictures at sunrise or sunset. If you only capture photos during midday, you'll typically end up with a lot of grays, greens, browns, and blues in your photos, but unless it's fall colors, you won't really end up with any interesting oranges or reds. On top of that, a lot of people end up missing out on sunrises and sunsets because they're sleeping, eating dinner, indoors, or anything else. And even if they do manage to see these times of day, they're so short-lived that the colors that they throw on a landscape are still very interesting and unusual. All of this is important because color adds moods and emotions to a photo. It isn't just a way to make your images look good. For example, the color green is calm and gentle, and it appears everywhere in nature. Red, on the other hand, is much more unusual. It's a very vibrant and strong color, and it attracts a lot of attention because we don't see it all that often in nature. At a broad level, you can group colors into two main categories, warm and cool. Warm colors include red, orange, and yellow, while cool colors include green, blue, and purple. And as you might expect, the difference between them has a significant impact on the way that your photos look. For example, warm colors tend to be a lot more active, they have a lot of movement, and they attract a lot of attention. On the other hand, cool colors are a little bit more passive and subdued, and sometimes even a little bit gloomy. For example, a rainy blue day, or the calm blue sea. Once you understand the distinction, though, between these two categories, you have a powerful tool for shaping the emotional messages of your photos. When you have both warm and cool colors in the same photograph, or really any two distinct, different colors, you might end up with something that's known as color contrast. Now, just like regular contrast, color contrast strongly attracts a viewer's eye. For example, if I have a red berry in front of a green background, they don't need to be different levels of brightness for a viewer to gravitate towards the difference in their colors. So taking all of this into consideration, what are the best times of day for landscape photography? Well, there are no best times because this depends upon a number of factors. First, the photo that you want to take, also the emotions that you're trying to convey, as well as the specific landscape in front of you. However, I have already mentioned that sunset and sunrise are beautiful times of day for photography, and there are other conditions that can work equally well. One of my personal favorite times to take landscape photos is during something called the blue hour. And this is the time of day either before sunrise or after sunset where the sky turns a deep blue color. It doesn't necessarily last for a whole hour, but it can be a very beautiful time of day to take photos. Specifically, it tends to have very soft light with low contrast that can make for very nice and peaceful images. On top of that, during the blue hour, you might notice an effect that's called the belt of Venus, and this is where the Earth's shadow is cast on its own atmosphere, and the area above it turns kind of pinkish. And this is a very rare effect for most people to see, which makes it all the more powerful to include in your photos. All of this also depends upon the specific subject that you're photographing. Now, I wouldn't want to capture every single landscape photo at sunrise, sunset, or the blue hour just because other times of day and other conditions can work equally well. For example, if I'm photographing a waterfall, I might not want any bright highlights to fall on it, even if it's during sunrise or sunset, and that's just because they could be distracting. And in that case, I might even prefer an overcast or a cloudy day, which normally would not be associated with landscape photography. And that's not the only example of a good landscape photo that you can take during the middle of the day. For example, if fog rolls in, you could end up with very soft and gentle light, as well as simplifying the subject in front of you, and that can work really well in a number of photos. The same is true if it's a snowy day or if you're taking pictures during a storm. There are plenty of times where you'll be able to capture beautiful landscape photos, even if it isn't near sunset or sunrise. As important as color can be to landscape photography, you might also want to explore images with a lack of color. In other words, black and white photography. Now, it might seem a bit counterintuitive to take black and white landscape photos at a beautiful color scene, but there might be a few reasons why you would do so. First, if you want your photographs to harken back to the early days of landscape photography and have a sense of timelessness, black and white photography is a wonderful way to accomplish that. And similarly, if there are any distracting colors in your photo, by converting to black and white, you can simplify the way that the image looks. Personally, when I take photos, I always shoot them in color. If I want a black and white photo, I just convert it in post-production. That way I have the option to choose either the color or the black and white version of a photo in case I change my mind after the fact. Now, I certainly don't change all of my photos to black and white, but this is a very important tool to have at your disposal to take your images just that much farther. Ultimately, light and color are the two most important aspects of a good photo. In fact, a lot of landscape photographers chase light and color more than they chase the landscape itself. It's that important. And to a degree, it is true that you can adjust light and color in post-production. For example, you can make a photograph warmer or cooler by altering its color temperature. However, the true measure of a great photograph is that you captured the right light in the field. If you can use light and color to your advantage, then you're well on your way to taking the best possible landscape photos.